You are listening to The Tarot Diagnosis. I'm your host, Shannon. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I also happen to have a love for tarot. Each episode, I invite you to reflect with me as I work to demystify the tarot and the human experience, all while exploring tarot's connection to mental and emotional health. While this podcast may feel therapeutic, it is not meant to take the place of psychotherapy. So grab your cards and join me as I work to create a pathway to better understand ourselves and those around us. Well, hello. It has been a few weeks now since I've released an episode, and that's because I spent half of September traveling and immersing myself in nature and just really trying to be present. I had had such an intense urge to be near the ocean again and also in the mountains. So I definitely gave into this need to commune with Mother Nature, and she was so kind to me. And yeah, I really needed it. But I'm so happy to get back to the podcast and talk about all things tarot and therapy and the human experience. And honestly, I really haven't pulled cards that much this month. And really just because I was trying to be present in nature and with myself. And I actually didn't want any sort of external help to do any sort of self-reflecting. And I allowed myself to kind of step out of any sort of practices or rituals that had just kind of become a part of my routine and just kind of exist with the flow of nature and the earth. So yeah, it was nice, but I'm also feeling excited to kind of get back into my routine again and be pulling cards and get back into my own kind of personal ritual space. And so I decided to pull some cards today to dictate what the episode was going to be about, because I had a couple different ideas that in mind of topics that I wanted to explore, and I just could not decide. And so I was like, tarot's going to decide for me. And it was really interesting. Tarot came out loud and clear. And, you know, I think we all tend to notice patterns in our own personal tarot practice, but like sometimes we'll pull the same card over and over again. Like for me, I always pull the Eight of Pentacles. Like it is the one card that I will pull constantly all the time. And sometimes I'll just be pulling only cups or only swords. So I know that you all know what that's like. But this week when I got back from traveling, it was really interesting because I just couldn't stop pulling majors. In fact, even the last night we had a new moon circle inside the symposium community, and we were pulling cards, and I think all of my cards were majors, and similar to the cards I ended up pulling to inspire today's episode, actually. So yeah, I'm pulling the same majors over and over again. And so today what I ended up pulling was, so I grabbed my Pamela Coleman Smith playing card deck. I tend to go in between that deck and my Tarot Vintage deck. They're my two faves. And I ended up pulling the Devil, the Three of Swords, and the Lovers in that order, which if you just sit with that for a second and picture the Devil, the Three of Swords, and the Lovers, it's a really profound arc that is presented in front of you. This Three of Swords kind of bridging the experience between the Devil and the Lovers and having to maybe even move through the Three of Swords to get from the Devil to the Lovers. So yeah, just sitting with those cards, I was like, okay, I know exactly what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the Devil, and mainly because, and this is an interesting tidbit of information. So I had pulled from Pamela Coleman Smith's deck to guide the episode. And then I was like, I just got 2 new decks recently, and let me pull from those to see what comes up before I just commit to these 3 cards. So the first deck that I pulled from is the Mindscapes Tarot by John Rice. And I've been following his work for a while now. He's a fantastic, very talented artist. And the Mindscapes Tarot is a gorgeous oil pastel deck. And if you're a lover of indie tarot decks, I cannot recommend this one enough. And it's been really nice to kind of nerd out too over the use of oil pastels because it's a medium that not many people use. And I personally only use watercolor and oil pastels in my own personal artwork. So I really loved that that is the medium that John uses. And I just love how textured and visceral the Mindscapes Tarot feels. So if you're interested in that, definitely recommend. So I grabbed that and I was like, let me pull from this deck, and what shows up? The devil. I really appreciated the imagery on his version of the devil, though. It's very different. And if you get my email updates, then you'll see a picture of that card in the email announcing this episode. And it kind of shows a cityscape with different lights and cars, and his description and reasoning behind that he writes in the accompanying booklet is kind of like referencing like the city lights and how they can mimic temptation and all of these vices that exist around you. And it's kind of a rainy landscape too, which I appreciated some of the symbolism behind that. So I was like, okay, so I've consistently been pulling the devil so far, not only today, but in, the previous couple days. And I was like, I just got another deck sent to me as a PR box from Red Feather, the Eternal Tarot. And so I was like, let me pull from that deck. And this imagery is very different from the Mindscapes Tarot. The Mindscapes is definitely inspired by Rider Waite, but John takes his own artistic influences, puts those into the mix. But the Eternal Tarot is definitely Rider Waite influenced, and it's a really beautiful black and white deck done entirely in charcoal and graphite. So if you're interested in black and white decks, you'll definitely love this one. And it just feels really timeless too, which I think is always nice. So grabbed that one, and I kid you not, and this was the first time I had used it because I just opened the box when I got back into town, and so I shuffled the hell out of this deck. Like I do, like anytime I get a new deck, I feel like I spend 20 minutes shuffling it because I want it to be as shuffled as possible. And what comes out? The devil. So that is what we are talking about today. And, I've talked about the devil on the podcast in the past, but I feel like I've really only talked about it through the lens of attachment theory. So today, especially regarding when I originally pulled for this episode, pulling the devil, the Three of Swords, and the Lovers, I was really inspired to look at this archetype through the lens of being stuck in the past as it relates to relationships, because I'm looking at the devil and the Lovers and the Three of Swords. And I just kept thinking about clients and couples that I've seen over the years and how the, the interpretation and the symbolism and the meaning of these archetypes just exude a very specific relational conflict that I tend to see. So I knew right away that is what I wanted to talk about. And, if you've ever studied or really looked at the devil and the Lovers side by side, you know that they are kind of like archetypal mirrors. It's the same two figures in each card. They're nude and vulnerable. But in the devil, of course, they're chained up. Their heads are, kind of slightly turned down, not entirely, but in the Lovers, they're unchained, they're free, they're standing kind of tall and proud. They're looking, more up. But it's clear that they're the same two figures. And then to see the Three of Swords kind of bridging or acting as a bridge between these two archetypes, it felt like such a particular feeling and experience of moving from the energy and the kind of stuckness of the devil into the freedom of the Lovers. So typically when we think of the devil card, we often think of things like, addiction, shadows, obsessions, feeling powerless. But from a therapeutic lens, the devil is also a perfect representation of cognitive distortions, these kind of mental trappings and mental loops that we get stuck in. And just for a quick refresher, cognitive distortions are essentially unhelpful thought patterns that we fall into. And it's usually unconscious. We don't realize that we're falling into these patterns. They become pretty ingrained and just kind of automatic. And there's a whole bunch of different cognitive distortions, but the few that I think of in terms of the devil in relationships are typically all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, mind reading, and emotional reasoning. So, for example, all or nothing thinking might be like, oh, my partner snapped at me, they must hate me. Whereas overgeneralization would be they were critical once, so they're always going to be critical. An example of mind reading might be, oh, they sighed, they're annoyed with me. And then emotional reasoning would be, I feel rejected, so I must be rejected. For this episode, I really kind of want to hang on to all or nothing thinking and overgeneralization. And these are super common thought traps that I see in relationships. And I feel like exactly kind of what the devil kind of represents or points us towards in terms of cognitive distortions. And, it's very I feel like the devil represents what happens when we start kind of seeing our partner and our interactions as kind of absolutes, like either all good or all bad. And in terms of a cognitive distortion, when we're in that space, we forget that our partner, like us, they're complex, they're nuanced, they're imperfect humans. So when we find ourselves stuck in the archetypal energy of the devil in relationships, and we're in these cognitive distortion thought loops, we might be saying things like, you never listen, or you always ignore me. When in reality, it's probably rare that, things are always, this or never that. But when we're hurt or we're frustrated or we're feeling unseen or unheard, we tend to just say those things, without even like pausing to think about them. And I see this all the time with couples where communication and tension is building, where maybe there was a situation that happened once and now you've created a narrative or a story about it. And I'm not talking about, significant betrayals. That's a whole other, discussion and an issue to explore. Nothing as significant as even like an infidelity, but I'm talking more like maybe your partner was overstimulated one day and snapped at you while you were vacuuming. And now you have this thought or this cognitive distortion that they hate when you vacuum or that you can't vacuum if they're home. And the problem with this style of thinking is that it erases kind of like the whole picture, what's really kind of going on. So if your partner snapped at you once, that doesn't mean they don't care about you or they don't like what you're doing. Just like if you forgot to rinse the dishes or load the dishwasher, that doesn't mean that you're, universally inconsiderate or that you never rinse the dishes or you never load the dishwasher. When we generalize like this, when we overgeneralize, we stop seeing the moments when our partners do show up or do help out or, do get things right or make us feel secure and loved and heard and seen. And that's usually because when we're stuck in these cognitive distortions, the narrative has been decided already. There's no room for editing. And I think this is why it feels so connected to the devil. That overgeneralization, that all or nothing thinking is like a mental psychological chain that also keeps us trapped physically sometimes. It keeps us locked into a very specific story mentally that then we kind of like act out behaviorally. And just like the devil card, this pattern can become, self-perpetuating. The more that we repeat the narrative, the more that we exist within it, the more we just continue to feel trapped and controlled by it. And then the harder it is to notice moments that actually contradict it. So after I pulled the devil, the next card that I pulled was the Three of Swords, which I feel like really represents the pain and the suffering that the cognitive distortions create, even if we're not entirely aware of it. So, the Three of Swords in this case would represent the, mental and emotional consequences of living with, perpetuating, strengthening these cognitive distortions and thought loops. When we stay stuck in a single narrative, like, oh, my partner snapped, we'll keep the vacuuming example. So my partner snapped at me while I was vacuuming. So now I can only vacuum when they're gone. When we're stuck in that very singular way of viewing one tiny moment, we are then reliving that pain and discomfort over and over of like when our partner snapped at us. And then we're reinforcing the memory when it comes up by behaving in a way that we feel like, is a direct reflection of what they needed or wanted, not wanting us to vacuum, for example. And the Three of Swords represents that kind of like mental replay. But it's really, also the moment of recognition. And with the Three of Swords representing kind of like intellect and cognition and especially clarity, when we are finally in this space of acknowledging, oh shit, I've had this cognitive distortion for, X amount of years or X amount of time. The Three of Swords, the clarity of recognizing that there's some duality there. It's like, oh, there's a relief in acknowledging that the way I've been thinking about a situation has actually been harming me. But then, the clarity in and of itself can also be uncomfortable. So we have a lot of layers within this Three of Swords. And in therapy, that kind of just feels like one of those breakthrough moments, where it's like, oh, wow, I've been telling myself this story for years. And I realize that it's completely shaped the way I've shown up in this relationship. So this is an example of how not only does the cognitive distortion cause pain, but then the clarity and the realization of like, oh, wow, like I've perpetuated this story that is, not necessarily 100% accurate. That in of itself can be uncomfortable and painful. It's not an easy moment to acknowledge and realize. So then the next card I ended up pulling was the Lovers. And, if the devil represents being stuck and chained to these unconscious patterns, these cognitive distortions, the Lovers would then represent our conscious choice and the freedom that we actually have and then would feel when we release ourselves from these cognitive distortions. And I think this is where kind of the therapeutic component comes in because, once we notice the story that we've been telling ourselves, we can then decide what to do with it. And that usually involves what we would call like reality testing. So you reality test the thought. Was my partner snapping at me actually about me and what I was doing, or were they just stressed out that day? So you can see that there's some flexibility in a question like that. And then we would gather some new evidence. So that might sound like, has my partner supported me or expressed gratitude in other moments? And then, after that, we would move on to creating a new narrative. And a new narrative might sound something like, okay, well, that was just one difficult moment for us. It doesn't have to define the whole situation. And so, this is very cognitive behavioral therapy, very CBT coded. And, I'm not the biggest fan of CBT. It definitely has its time and place. I think it's often overused, especially when other more beneficial modalities can be implemented. But in the case of CBT, that we would call this reframing. And in my method of therapeutic tarot, it's really a display of a movement from the archetypal energy of the devil into the archetypal energy of the Lovers, where we're moving from kind of unconscious trappings to, of shame and pain and discomfort to freedom and choice, not just within ourselves, but also within our relationships. So if you're listening now and you're thinking, well, damn, I have my own kind of like devil Three of Swords situation going on right now, there are a few things that you can do just now to be reflecting on, whether or not you are in an unhelpful thought loop and what to do moving forward. So, like I mentioned earlier, there's the reality testing, the searching for evidence, and then creating a new narrative. But we're going to break that down even further. So first you would identify the thought loop. Then you would name the story. Then you reality check. You make sure you're feeling your feelings, that you're not bypassing or ignoring anything. And then you choose what to do next. So for identifying the loop, you're going to write down or reflect on the situation that's causing you pain or discomfort. So what exactly happened? Be super specific. And then you're going to name the story that you've attached to it. So what meaning have you assigned to this event? What does it say about you, your partner, or the relationship? Then you're going to reality check it. So you're going to ask, is this 100% true 100% of the time? What evidence supports it? What evidence challenges it? And then you let yourself feel the discomfort of what you've discovered. That's the invitation of the Three of Swords to feel the pain, to feel the grief. So you can then say, okay, I'm releasing this. I'm not going to allow this to be my story anymore. And then once you release that, you're able to move into the choice aspect. So, the kind of taking action where you can maybe even picture yourself removing the chain off of, around your neck from the devil card and asking yourself, what would it look like to relate to the situation differently? And how would I act if I believed a more balanced story? So I want to take a few minutes to show you what it would look like to utilize tarot for something like this, because, our brains are so powerful and are designed to keep us safe, not happy. So sometimes it can be difficult to sit and reflect and see different scenarios and perspectives. And that's why tarot is so powerful, because the images allow us to access different parts of our brain that otherwise may have been too difficult to grasp otherwise. So if you have a deck nearby, grab it, because I'm going to encourage you to pull alongside me. And just for ease, I think I just want to keep using that same vacuum situation that I've used so far as an example. So first, we're going to identify the loop. And we're not going to be using tarot through each of these steps that I just laid out a moment ago. We're only going to use them for a few. So first, you identify the loop. And the loop in this case would be, my partner snapped at me one day while I was vacuuming. Then you identify the story and the meaning you attach to that loop, which is, that must mean that they hate when I vacuum when they're home. And then you're going to reality check. And reality check is when tarot can come in and help you identify the evidence that exists supporting the story and the evidence that exists that disproves the story. So let's go ahead and shuffle and pull now just to see what comes out and how tarot can help identify evidence to support and evidence to disprove. Okay, so for evidence to support, we have the Four of Pentacles reversed. So in terms of supporting the story, my partner, this means my partner hates when I vacuum while they're home. The Four of Pentacles reversed feels kind of like overwhelm. Like maybe there's a lot of things that you're trying to hold on to, that you're trying to do. In this case, the partner, a lot of chores that they have going on, a lot of obligations on their plate. And maybe they do tend to get snippy when they're feeling overstimulated. And that's maybe exacerbated by loud noises like vacuuming. So in that case, that would be evidence that does support the story. So now let's pull a card for evidence that disproves the story. Okay. All right. The Three of Cups. So for the Three of Cups as evidence that doesn't support this story of, that must mean my partner hates when I vacuum when they're home, this shows that maybe you've actually had fun cleaning and doing chores together in the past and, made it an event that's enjoyable. Maybe you listened to music and danced while you cleaned and vacuumed, but your brain's not allowing you to remember those moments because it's like, oh, this one uncomfortable thing happened that one time. So now I have to always be on the lookout for that uncomfortable thing, where there's room for flexibility here if we allow it. And tarot just showed and gave us an opportunity to say, oh yeah, you know what? I do remember these times that we were silly and goofy while we were cleaning and it didn't bother them. And then we can go back to that Four of Pentacles reverse and say, oh, okay, maybe this happened that one time because they were super overwhelmed and didn't know I was going to be vacuuming and it was too loud and they didn't know how to regulate and they got snippy with me. So after you do that, then you're going to start feeling the feelings, that realization that you were stuck in that all or nothing overgeneralization thought loop. And then once you spend some time there and you've done some processing, that's when you can start moving into the energy of the lovers and embrace your freedom of choice. And you can start asking yourself, how can you relate to this situation differently now? How would you act or feel if you embraced a more balanced story? And if you want, you can bring tarot into this aspect or this part of those steps as well. So let's see what that would look like. If we pulled a card for how would you act or feel if you embraced a more balanced story? Oh, the Four of Wands, of course. That's really sweet, actually. So how would you act? The Four of Wands. This feels so clear. Like you would feel at ease in your space. You would be celebrating your wins together. You would be enjoying the flow and complementary experiences of your energies. I love that the Four of Wands came up. So you can see how tarot can be a really beneficial tool when otherwise, maybe you would have sat with a question for a really long time and had a hard time reaching for information or evidence to support or disprove. And the images can help you get there a little bit quicker. Well, that was my arc of the devil to the lovers with the bridge of the Three of Swords, moving from this relational experience of stuckness and cognitive distortion, feeling the pain and discomfort, acknowledging that, and then moving into choice and freedom. So I hope that maybe this felt like a gentle invitation for you to notice maybe when you're carrying, old narratives or unhelpful cognitive distortions. And hopefully it gave you some encouragement to move through that and explore your own devil, Three of Swords, lover's arc. Thank you so much for listening to the Tarot Diagnosis. For more tarot and mental health content, follow the Tarot Diagnosis on Instagram. You can also subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode and sign up to receive the Tarot Diagnosis emails where you'll have access to exclusive spreads and exciting announcements. To join an incredible community of tarot and psychology enthusiasts, join the Tarot Diagnosis membership community, The Symposium, by visiting thetarotdiagnosis.com.